Welcome to Reading to My Mom, Episode 1. My name is Joe. I'm the publisher with Historia Research Press. We're a small independent outfit near Printers Row in Chicago. In fact, we're so small we really only have one author. The author is by training a U.S. historian, and he's written two nonfiction works for us on higher education, the first Outsourcing Student Success in 2017, and more recently Honors of Inequality in 2020. In between the two works of nonfiction, the author insisted that we publish a third called Arcane Cage, which by almost any definition in the publishing industry would be regarded as fiction or a work of fantasy. However, this author fervently believes that this place and time existed in our world history, here on Earth, among humankind, and has written it as if it is a historical text, complete with footnotes, maps, timelines, references, descriptions of how this place existed, of the characteristics of this place. One of those characteristics is the control of magic. Needless to say, the academic presses wouldn't touch his work. So he utilized the relationship that he had built with us in order to have published his research on this fantastic place and time in our world history. For some time now, this author's mother has requested that we turn his work, The Arcane Cage, into an audiobook. But quite honestly, it has not generated enough interest to warrant the expenses associated with that. Those of us who are inessential to the operations of the U.S. economy are currently in a lockdown in order to tame or bring under control this COVID-19 pandemic. So I've given the author permission not to create an audiobook, but to read to his mother over the next month, April of 2020, as we all continue to do what we can to stem the tide or bend the curve of the spread of this deadly disease. So without any further fanfare, for this particular work in our publishing house, allow me to introduce the work and the author who will be reading to his mother in episode 1 of Reading to My Mom. Hi, Mom. My publisher, my worthless publisher, who probably couldn't sell a copy of my work to the only literate person on a deserted island, has finally given me an opportunity to read to you my most important historical work, Arcane Cage, being a historical narrative of fantastic events during the decline and fall of the Provenance. To truly appreciate this work, you have to set aside everything you learned about ancient civilizations and come to understand that the Provenance and the Domain more generally, the Arcane Age, is the birthplace of our world civilization and history. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues in the academic world don't respect the significance of the Provenance in sparking what today we value as democracy, philosophy, the love of wisdom, and the pursuit of knowledge that has advanced the modern world as much as it has. My preface, therefore, seeks to deflect the types of criticism that I know all too well in my pursuit to understand how this fantastic world has given us so many treasures that humankind should cherish. The Preface. The Republican visionary James Harrington, in his magisterial Commonwealth of the Provenance, makes note of a certain late arcane philosopher who made a lengthy and impassioned apology in defense of the Empire for Liberty, with the expectation that at the conclusion thereof his audience would burst forth in praise and applause. The rhetorical magician was only to be met by a single lone voice inquiring who it was that disavowed freedom. I fear the same equally applies to me, hereupon engaging in a shameless defense of an arcane historical study. For without doubt, if we held the humanities in high esteem, as all humankind surely should, and as the wisest among us still do, then my preface to a history of the Provenance, the very first social democracy of the world, and the ancient origin for the love of all classical wisdoms, is as consequential and supernumerary as the performance assumed in an apology for liberty. For it may be said and truly averred that the death of the humanities has been greatly exaggerated. It is our misfortune, however, to live in a golden age, when no happiness escapes the gaping maw of conspicuous consumption and invidious distinction. Every pure pleasure falls into the gilded hands of the silicon sultans and Bitcoin barons, who peer greedily into our private doings, and affirm no value in the life or the pleasure of non-salable pursuits. To be certain, artificial intelligence will not hesitate to slander the Provenance itself as utopian because it lacked digital technologies and zolpidem. And so I hope no person of common sense will adjudge my scholarship needless in its search for a method to discharge the public's indifference to the Provenance, the avarice of those who seek to commercialize the humanities, and folly of those who fail to understand social progress, devised to foster. Agrigentum's wisdom, translated to the Latin, states, Scientia non habet inimicum preta ignorantum. Arcane philosophy has no foe but the cloud of unknowing. My detractors, I foretell, will divide themselves into three different styles of censure. A very strong faction that condemns any study of arcane history and the Provenance as a fanciful digression with no pecuniary merit. A second and sizable delegation that admits to the value of such subjects, but not in this particular genre. And the third, the least numerous contingent, who countenance historical narrative and similar modes of analysis as worthy of the subject matter, but fault my knowledge of the literary canon or interpretation of the primary sources. Self-doubt, it has been truly said, jumps the hedge at its lowest point. So therewith I endeavor to cloak myself in a shell as hard as steel, as a defensive measure, and if I happen to strike a blow or land an insult that gives my assailants a hesitancy for the merits of their indifference or criticism, I accept no fault for my preemptive rebuttal to ensure that the reading public has been afforded the luxury to turn the page rather than put down this work in apathy or disgust. To the skeptics who question the verity of arcane history itself, I disavow and return your willful ignorance for timeless archetypes of bravery, perseverance, and wisdom that draw power from the common weal and the occasional toss of devil's bones to secure an outcome that overwhelms and dismays the eternal forces arrayed against humankind. The dissenters I openly dismiss as wholly lacking in gratitude for the marvelous undertakings of enlightenment and of self-governance. Those honorable treasures of world history in former and later ages, from distant and nearby nations, earned at magnificent and tragic costs, that demand the care, the study, and the practiced resoluteness encouraged and advanced by the humanities. Of the third, I ask my critics only this: to count my cause so good and its intended audience so unprejudiced that the favor of a publishing house to bolster the two, or the cunning of an agent to join them, are unnecessary where the plain and genuine joy in the humanities is present. I wholeheartedly acknowledge that this work, from the preface to the index, is derivative and unoriginal in nearly every respect, as I resisted the urge to trouble myself with the preternatural question of what strength of character makes one a scholar, or what faculty for novelty defines one as an original author. I do not presume to challenge the specific honors and distinguished achievements accorded to the luminaries whose contributions have made this minor effort possible. Nor do I wish to argue the merits or demerits for the accounts others have told about an arcane age and our common global legacy. As these pages attest, the sympathetic figures and exceptional historians who have preserved for us all the great hope embodied by the Provenance and its people deserve our utmost respect. I too know my indebtedness to them in inadvertent and untold ways, as I aspired only to pick up the torch they previously hurled into the divine darkness, dust it off so that it may burn anew, and throw it already further into the void with what good wit remains to me at my age. If in my efforts I have unintentionally slighted, misstated, or distorted the masters whose works form the fountainhead of provenancial history, I wish to make known that I borrowed all and stole none, such that I may be called a terrible satirist or a poor translator, rather than a vicious wordmonger or mercenary novelist. For my part, I thank in advance those who will seek to mend the record or correct what has gone amiss, for I have no great hubris in knowing the immaculate or the final word on this important subject matter. I frankly welcome what criticism may come from friends and colleagues who spend the time on what many others surely regard as a trifling chronicle littered with clumsy translations of verse and fantastical footnotes that offer a deficient gloss on a hackneyed narrative lacking both style and substance. As to my purpose, a work of superimpositions, as I desire to call it, may boast of no one singular event or objective as a spur to labors at once foolish and incredible in scope. I first discovered the allure and wonder of arcane history as an impressionable youth, easily carried away by a fascination with an ancient civilization and by an imagination for the many strange phenomena of a magical world. As a young adult, however, the narrow-minded vision for what constitutes higher education, advocated by anti-humanists, encouraged me to put childish interests behind me. I dutifully dedicated my studies to the reasons for the rise and fall of nations during the golden age of world history, earning my doctorate in the field of U.S. history with an emphasis on the late American Republic and its economy. Perchance, my life's one true romantic interest cared for 2 children from a previous marriage when we met. Among the new parental duties I assumed, I read to my 2 new wards, and once having exhausted the children's classics, I introduced them to the great literature on arcane history that I had not read for myself in almost 2 decades. When both reached a sufficient age to understand the contingencies involved in historical outcomes, we as a family role-played the great events from provenantial history as a means to explore and understand more fully the moral quandaries and heroism of the celebrated champions from the earliest eras of civilization. Over the years, vicariously experiencing their wonder and enthusiasm, I gradually grew to have a deeper appreciation for the timeless foibles associated with the human capacity and responsibility for liberty, from the distant past to the present. As one who has given much of his adult life to the Academy and its administration, let it not be said that I valued education more than parenthood. Though it may have seemed so to my family at times, my fault has been that I know no other way to express love than as love for the humanities. I do not mean only the canonic treasures guarded by literati, or the indulgences dismissed by the angelic investors, but the plain truth discovered in heated squabbles and catty distractions while seated around the dinner table, over the possibility of historical agency in dicey situations. Out of respect for what I learned, and not what I sought to teach, I dedicate this work to my sons, as an expression of gratitude for restoring sight to my third eye. Of course, if not for their mother, my life's partner, I would likely be off in the corner somewhere at a little-known college or university, preoccupied with the technical skills and merits of scholarly research, yet unaccustomed to telling stories or suggesting solutions to problems that warrant consideration in higher education or policy circles. Inasmuch as her companionship has allowed me to press on with an endless series of fatuities, her reenactments of decisions and actions taken by more than one of the characters in this historical narrative have influenced my interpretation of events in more ways than I can recall. Suffice it to say, not a word has been written without the benefit of her reflections and perspective on human experience and on the ethical pursuit of personal happiness. Research of this nature adds many depths to the ledger, and mine are too numerous to cite at length following years of careful research and revisions. All 7 of the great archives of the Provenance and its Arcane Age offered me ample opportunity to review pertinent factual documents and archaeological relics. None, however, afforded me a postdoc fellowship, as valuable and as warm as that graciously provided by the Weathermark Center for Rumination on the Classical Powers. To my sundry readers who find themselves in Chicago on a lazy day, I urge you to pay a visit to the Weathermark's Tavern, to peruse the plaques commemorating past graduates, the Rummies, and to join in thoughtful banter with the remarkable ownership, breezy staff, and chatty if stern patrons. The digital privatization of local intelligence and print scholarship continues apace. As a result, the mission of public libraries has never been more significant for the production of knowledge. The Chicago Public Library, CPL, provided much-needed resources and support when institutions of higher education and university presses rejected my scholarly interests as tedious pedantry or blasphemous fictions, and sometimes both at the same time. The beauty of a public library system is that it knows no standards for admission nor imposes a predetermined set of outcomes on student learning. In these 2 respects, CPL stands as a fire-bearing titan that commands praise from learned people everywhere. And as the public library is an appendage of its host, it seems to me the city deserves recognition for holding true to a simple preamble when its nation faltered. Whereas I could make mention of the insights and corrections incorporated here and there from the feedback of friends and kin who have received advanced copies of this volume, I choose rather to bemoan and reproach the many others who forswore my academic potential or begrudged me paper certifications without endorsing my suitability for a tenured academic career. I beg pardon thereof if in this work I have appended citations where needless, or made redundant statements of wisdom where obvious, in an effort to reckon discrepancies between my reputation and my vanity. And I ask for leniency if in the omission of events and abridgment of subjects I deemed it best to submit a fact where careful interpretation called for a story, or to abbreviate a fabulous tale where a Pythia's side encapsulated the moral of the story. Having made these disclaimers, I otherwise accept sincerely and without hesitation the limitations of any historical work drafted in studious obscurity and unwanted disinterest. Now, as conclusion, I urge my readers, who have conceded to read this disgraceful prologue, to disregard further errors, and if only out of respect for the humanities, to suspend disbelief in my flights of fancy when the historical evidence proved wanting or inadequate to the larger narrative. Presuming this compact, I have no doubt that you will join in my admiration for the many characters and in my curiosity about the histories retold herein, and that we shall part on good terms, without injury or injustice.